Hello there everyone. How do you feel about spending some quality time with UXW Bill? Might be questionable quality time, but here we go anyway. And I hope that you'll be able to indulge me during the beginning of this video because I'm going to tell you a few stories that lead up to what the particular item that you're looking at right now actually is, along with its significance to me. You see, many years ago when I was a youngster, it's getting to be many more every day, my father brought home two multimedia computers. There was a Packard Bell 486SX at 25 megahertz. That was the computer that my brother College 153 ended up using. And then there was the computer I got, which was a Dell Precision 433 SI computer system. It was the first multimedia computer that I ever had. And compared to the PC XT class K-Pro, with dual 5 1/4 inch 360 kilobyte floppy drives and the long persistence monochrome phosphor monitor that I had been using, well, it was such a revelation. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved the K-Pro. That was something that my grandmother handed down to me because she never could read the monitor very well, and it is probably to her that I owe a significant amount of credit for my modern day interest in computers and computing equipment, because that K-Pro computer became such a staple of my young life. I wrote stories, I used the Paint program. I loved that machine. It was my world. And I also thought it was kind of unfair that my brother College 153 got the Epson Apex XT class machine with the color CGA monitor and never used it, while I was using my computer all the time and was stuck over in monochrome land. But I coped. And like I say, when I got my first multimedia computer, it was such an incredible experience. I remember being just taken in by the Compton's Multimedia Encyclopedia and the other titles that came with the machine. Of course, time wears on, and what once was impressive when it was new becomes significantly less impressive. And so it was that during my junior high years, I got an upgrade to a newer computer system, a clock quadrupled 486 DX4 in about 1996 or thereabouts. And the poor old Dell Precision 433 SI, in addition to falling by the wayside, also ended up donating several of its parts to make the DX4 which was a white box clone, into a complete system. Unfortunately, when the computer shop that was doing this work happened to be doing all of these things, well, something happened to the poor Dell and resulted in its no longer being able to perform a power-on self-test. Of course, I was pretty young and inexperienced at the time, so I basically shelved it. And then one day a kid at school had come up with a DC brushless fan motor out of something, and I just had to have one. I had to match what he had. And so I took the power supply on that poor old Dell apart and cannibalized the fan out of it. I also remember stealing the power switch. Well, time goes on, nostalgia continues, and I began to lust for another example of the species. What I found is that apparently Dell either didn't make very many Precision 433 SI model desktop computers, or very few of them have survived. Probably a combination of factors, especially in this mandatory electronics recycling world that we live in now. Well, much more recently than that, about a week ago in fact, fellow YouTuber lmole3 sent me an email saying that he had placed a bid, or come across and subsequently bid on, the details are unclear in my mind at the moment, a massive old-style computer case. Probably predated the motherboard that it appeared to have in it, which looked to be from the early AMD Athlon XP era, I would say. Anyway, he placed a bid on that, ended up winning it, and I was looking at the auction listing when I discovered something very attractive at the bottom of the suggested items to bid on list. It's not exactly what I was looking for, but it is extremely close. And so I owe a lot of credit, maybe even a debt of gratitude, to fellow YouTuber lmole3 for sharing that ridiculous auction listing that he bid on and won. And ridiculous is most definitely in quotes, as well as something of a term of affection there, because it turned me on to getting a little bit closer to finding a forgotten computer of my past. I've managed to rediscover the Packard Bell. I've got two examples of the K-Pro, and of my dad's Zenith Data Systems computer as well. But the Dell and an Apple II have so far remained stubbornly elusive. Well, this is not exactly the Dell system that I was looking for, but it is very close. And so I am incredibly stoked about opening this box, even if I'm a little less than thrilled by the condition that it's in after being handled by United Parcel Smashers. And so I thought I would share what might be a particularly emotional unboxing experience with all of you today. Hard to believe I'm not using my truck keys to do this, not really using a proper tool, but I do have a pair of scissors, which is at least a little closer to the proper thing, and it looks like I might need it. Let's see here. Because this thing is playing hard to open. It looks like the seller kind of made a taller box into a smaller one, and boy, I hope what's inside has survived, because I'm really going to take it hard, I think, if it hasn't. So let me work through a little more of this packaging and I'll be right back. Alright, I made some significant headway in removing the top cover and most of the tape from the box. So this is the honest-to-goodness, unrehearsed reaction. Yeah, it definitely looks like somebody made a bigger box out of that. Unfortunately, when I shook this box, I came to realize that what's in it is not tight against the side of the box, and that's usually a recipe for terrible amounts of shipping damage. I'm kind of nervous here, can you tell? I don't often get rattled, but so far of what I've seen of this packaging job, it's not really filling me too terribly full of confidence, especially since this machine is billed as being basically flawless. Alright, I got myself a better pair of scissors here. Let's see what we get. I see some kind of a piece of paper in there. It looks like it's got a stop sign printed on it. I can't imagine what that might be for. I may have to do some other unpacking here. So let me pause the camera and do that. Alright, the paper note's not a real big deal. It's basically just asking me to contact the seller before involving eBay if I have a particular problem with the system. Let's go ahead and take a quick overview of things here, and believe me, it'll have to be fast because I'm fighting the blinking videotape symbol of doom. This is not an exact clone of the Dell Precision 433 SI, but it is the same basic case style, with the notable exception of a key lock. The drives are in the same position, power switch is there. Mine had a different Made in USA sticker that was, as I remember it, either over here somewhere, maybe it was in the middle, I don't really remember. Believe it or not, I do still have that machine, or what's left of it. I also have the modem and the sound card. And I am thinking, no, I'm sorry, I have the CD-ROM drive, the 2-speed CD-ROM drive, and the sound card, both of which are still around and still work just fine. But for most intents and purposes, this is close enough, especially if it's the closest thing that I ever happen to find. So let's go ahead and take a look at the back panel here, and then we'll take it downstairs and we'll see if it survived its trip to me. I wouldn't swear that the power supply is original. There's the information plate with the date of manufacture, 80192, so it is a little older. It looks like this computer had some kind of data acquisition cards in it of some sort, possibly for industrial process control and automation. Hard to tell. And there's the service tag. We'll have to look that up on Dell's website and see if it returns anything useful. But for now, I can't wait to get this downstairs and turn it on and see if it works. I was told that it does indeed pass its power on self-test and boots to DOS from the seller. Now, despite the fact that I am incredibly excited about this, stoked beyond words, I'm trying to take things at a nice, even, tempered pace and make sure that I do all the prudent things before powering this computer up, because I'd really hate to blow it up, especially if there's been anything that got knocked loose or damaged by shipping. I've brought it down here to the computer project table, set it up, took the cover off, and right away I discovered something very interesting. If you look at the legend printed on this sticker, you'll see it mentions Dell 316SX and 325SX component identification. Well, this is very clearly a 486 era system. Even the front of the case readily affirms that. So what's a 386SX motherboard layout doing in here? I have no idea. Maybe somebody just slapped the wrong sticker on there at the Dell factory. More evidence of the date of manufacture. Looks like maybe that was the case, because there's about 4 days worth of time that passed between those two date stamps being put on there. I don't know if maybe one of them indicates when the case went through, say, the process of painting versus the process of being assembled into a finished system unit, or what that might be. Hard to say. The seller of this system did mention that they had done some kind of a modification to this system so that the CMOS memory would be kept intact and the real-time clock would keep running. And I've been greatly curious about what that might be, and I think it's this little thing that's taped to the side of the power supply here. I think that's a little tiny battery pack of some description. It's certainly been plugged into a 4-pin connector on the motherboard where an outlying CMOS and clock retention battery might go. Just wanted to make sure that it was done properly, because I wouldn't put it past a seller doing something without realizing that connecting a non-rechargeable battery to a system that attempts to charge its CMOS battery might lead to some kind of an explosion, and that would certainly ruin all of our fun. Here are the various expansion cards. I'm going to go ahead and remove these if this is the right screwdriver for the job, which maybe it's not. Okay, I'm back, and a different screwdriver does indeed make all the difference. Whistled those cards right out of there and nothing flat. And I don't really know what they were used for. I haven't looked up anything about this card, but it looks like it has multiple ports to perhaps control or acquire data from something. There's the largest chip on the board, a Harris Semiconductor CP82C55A-5, manufactured in the 14th week of 1992. I'll definitely look up the data sheet on that, so there may be more in the video description that most of you never seem to read. And then we have the second card in the machine. You can do a web search on this, but you'll find about as little as I did. Basically, the auction where this machine was offered up for sale. I have no idea what this card is for. It is billed as being a Strawberry Tree Mini 16. Copyright of 1992. Most of the chips, which are simple logic chips of varying types, although there are numerous repeated examples on this board, a bank of dip switches and a clock crystal. They place this thing's manufacture around 1992 as well, but the actual printed circuit artwork seems to be quite a bit older. And whatever became of Strawberry Tree, I don't know, but it seems they have vanished with practically no trace. And what is this thing over here? It's a Linear Technology LM3-9H. Can't read all of that. Maybe you can do better than I am because you're not trying to operate a camcorder. But this card is truly designed in a very interesting way. I have this cable coming out and then it immediately wraps right back around and breaks out into this large port. What is that, a 37-pin connector? I haven't counted them, so I could be wrong. But maybe some kind of industrial process control, data acquisition and logging in a laboratory environment? I really have no idea, and I would imagine that the hard drive in this machine can't tell any tales either because the seller did wipe it. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the motherboard, see what we've got here, see if there's any concealed damage or anything that looks to be wrong. The machine that I had back in the day had Cirrus Logic video, but for those of you who know Western Digital is only a manufacturer of hard drives, well, for a while they manufactured VGA and Super VGA display controllers as well, and this is one of them here right now. It has an outboard RAM DAC manufactured by AT&T from a time when AT&T was more than just the telephone company that they are today. They were quite diversified at one time. They even owned National Cash Register for a while. And here you can see something very interesting. This is a little bit of rework around the pins of the chip connecting to a surface-mounted resistor on the motherboard, R115 I believe it's called out as. And obviously that was done to work around some sort of a bug or production issue with the chip or the motherboard itself. Not too unusual to see that on old computer boards. You'll see there's more rework here in the form of this black wire that snakes its way across quite a bit of the board, past some simple logic chips and off to points as yet unexplored. Also an open space for a chip that wasn't used on this particular board. This board has no provisions for a 386SX processor, which makes sense because it's carrying a full-fledged 486, despite the fact that both are identified as an SX, where the 386SX is a cut-down microprocessor with a 16-bit data and 24-bit address bus. The 486SX is a true 486 processor, 32 bits in and out, data, address, and processor bit width, but it has no math coprocessor on board. At first, Intel manufactured these chips from ones with defective math coprocessors that failed during the test, so they just rebadged the chip and sold it at a lower cost instead of writing the whole thing off. And then later they actually supposedly manufactured these microprocessors without a math coprocessor on board in the first place. We get 3 ISA expansion slots, 4 memory sockets. Key difference between this system and the one that I had, as best I remember it, the system I had was Pentium overdrive capable, which gave a 486 class machine almost Pentium class capability, as well as a much greater clock speed. However, it required an enhanced processor socket, a socket 2 or a socket 3, which this system simply does not have. And I remember the microprocessor in it being down here, where the SIM sockets were over here. However, my memory could have failed me. We'll find out if I can actually put hands on the original carcass of the system. As best I remember it, I still had the top cover and the base system unit as well. Have a 5 1/4 inch floppy drive, most probably high density. The hard drive is hiding out underneath this metal shield. I'm going to take a guess and say quantum. Let's see if I'm right. Yep, it would appear that I am correct. That is almost certainly a quantum drive that is hiding out in there from the looks of things. They have a very distinctive sound, and used to be quantum drives were quite reliable, but then when the Fireball multi-gigabyte series came out, something just went so terribly, terribly wrong with that. Not really sure what happened there. 1.44 megabyte floppy and a power switch that, unlike today's ATX power supplies, actually does switch line voltage going into the power supply. So let's go ahead and pop the case cover back on this thing. I will put the cards back in temporarily just so the blanks aren't open at the back, and we'll see what this thing does. Oh man. Alright, I'll admit this is not the most period correct monitor to use with this setup, although flat panel displays did exist at the time this computer was made. Well, that was something you had to spend a lot more money to get your hands on, and they were certainly nowhere near as capable as this one is. Despite being in that much of a rush, I'm still kind of apprehensive about turning this thing on, I'm not going to lie, because I'm going to feel bad if it blows up. How's about a period correct keyboard? Or at least relatively close, even if it's using the new style Dell logo. Oh man, here we go. Alright. Sweet! This is just so incredibly freaking awesome. Power on self-test. Beep. Starting MS-DOS. IMEM, extended memory driver. Looks like a fresh installation of MS-DOS version 6.22, the last ever released. We'll ask for a directory, but there's nothing really there to speak of. Let's see if we can get into system setup. Here's a fun trick that you can't do on your modern computer, if I remember the keystrokes. Okay, it's either Control-Alt-S or Control-Alt-Enter. There it is. As long as you're running in full real mode DOS, you don't have like an expanded memory manager or EMM 386, anything that would put the machine other than the true 8086 emulation mode, you can get into system setup from DOS. And if you don't make any changes, you can actually pop, well, you can almost pop right out of system setup. That didn't quite work. They were different times. Things were certainly not as stable as they are today. So we'll just go ahead and try that again real quick. Get a look at the system's hardware. Show you some interesting facets of the setup program. To at least the end of the Optiplex 780 era, Dell still used a customized Phoenix ROM BIOS, which still bore a copyright from the 1980s, the same as this system did. There's the time. The time is definitely not quite right. The date's okay though. Floppy drive information set right, and there's hard drive type 37 in here. 901 cylinders, 5 heads, no write pre-compensation, a landing zone of 901, which probably doesn't really matter, and 53 sectors per track. I could not tell you in my head how big of a drive that really is, but I can't imagine that it's more than, oh, maybe a couple hundred megabytes in size. So let's go ahead and see what's on the next page. Also, if you've ever run a Dell Latitude laptop like my D800, same setup program user interface. Some things just never change. Keyboard errors, system password, boot sequence. You could tell this thing not to boot from a floppy drive, which was certainly a novel feature at the time. You could control the non-cached address region. That was used if you had anything that reacted poorly to having its option ROM or memory range cached. Most of the time you didn't need it. Integrated devices for serial and parallel ports. All that stuff is presently enabled. There's the information about the system's hardware. I cannot imagine that there was a flash BIOS for this system, but I could get a surprise later on when I look it up. So, not much to see inside the setup program, not much to do with this thing as yet, but I just had to share it with you because even though it's not the exact machine I had, well, it's certainly close enough. By the way, if you have ever seen, or you happen to see, or you have a Dell Precision 433 SI personal computer, talk to me. I am very, very serious about being interested in it, okay? I guess we'll go ahead and quit setup, which will probably go about the way it did the first time, and we'll just see how big the hard drive is. Big plans for this system in the future, I can tell you that. I think I'm going to dig up that sound card, which is actually, again, in that Hewlett-Packard Vectra over there. See if I can put hands on the CD-ROM drive and turn this thing into the multimedia machine that I had way back in the day. Let's go ahead and see how big that hard drive is off the top of my head. 116 megabytes. Well, it's a little bit inferior to the system I had back then, because I had a 270 megabyte drive, but close enough. So thank you for watching, and by all means feel free to leave a comment if you happen to have one.